there are three forms that can be used in Florida. You can use you have to use one of these three before you can show any property at all. And so you can use these forms to progress someone through the process. And so you can start with the first form, which is the property pre-tour agreement. Then after that, you can progress to the showing agreement and then the exclusive buyer. The way that I like to relate it to is a pre-tour agreement is like a first date. There's not really a lot of commitment. Everyone's just kind of testing the water. The second one is the showing agreement. Now you guys are kind of going steady. You could still break it pretty easy, but it's still, limited. You've agreed you're not going to see other agents. And then the last form is the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, and that's like getting married. So that's, no matter what happens, whatever property they purchase, you're going to be involved in. So we'll get started here. I'll start by going over the property pre-touring agreement. So this, I just found it in the form section of Form Simplicity. This is basically the lowest threshold of what you need to satisfy in order to show a property. So this is one property, one day. You put in your name, which is the brokerage name. So the name of the brokerage, the name of the consumer, and then how long this agreement lasts. Usually it's a day when you're using this agreement, and then what your compensation would be. So this is used when you have someone that you don't know, they don't know you, and you are showing them one property. So maybe they call, this is a Zillow lead or something like that. They call you, they want to see one property. And the way I would handle this is no problem, happy to show you the property. I just have to have you sign this showing agreement before I'm allowed to show you anything. And just outlines, our company, what our commission is, and that's it. And explain to them that it's only good for this property on this day, or even just this day, and then that's it. There's no ties to anything. And so this is a very simple form that just says that, you're going to be paid this commission, so you'd fill in your commission here. So I recommend putting 3% plus the $3.95 transaction fee due at closing. Now, one important thing that I want to make sure that I am going over is all of this is in how you present it. It's in the words you use, it's in the tone that you use. You want to make this seem like it's a very matter-of-fact thing, that this is not something that is a huge deal. This is just a regular Tuesday for you guys. And so how I would handle this is, okay, Mr. Buyer, good to meet you. We'll just show you this property. I'm going to send you this pre-touring agreement for you to sign. That way I can set up the showing. It just says that if you like this property, that you'll use me as your agent, and this is my commission. Now, what's important, Mr. Buyer, is that my job is to make sure that my commission is paid for as much as possible by either the seller or the listing agent in the transaction. That way, none of my fee is coming out of your pocket. And so we'll work that into the deal. But in the event that there's some left over that the seller and the listing agent aren't able to cover, that will just go to you as a closing cost on the closing statement. So something very simple like that. If you need to, you can lower your commission to 2.5% plus the 395. Going any lower than that, I don't recommend. In fact, we like you to get permission from us before you're entering into any kind of serious agreement, any kind of pre-touring agreement or buyer agreement with a buyer at less than 2.5%, unless there's some kind of, unique circumstance, like maybe they're buying more than one property or they're selling and they're buying with you. But it's a good idea to protect your value and to protect your worth. And if someone that you don't know is not willing to pay you what you're worth, it's up to you to decide whether you want to move forward with that person or not. I mean, at the end of the day, it is your business, but this is something that they're gonna have to sign with anybody, regardless if it's you or not. And so if they're just calling around and they don't really value you or your time, then you may want to think about how you approach that. This one can be used at first, or you can jump right into the showing agreement. It is my preference that you jump into the showing agreement first and that you don't use this pre-property touring form, only because the showing agreement outlines some more of the conditions and specificity. And so, for example, this will tell you the parties that are involved and then the properties that you're going to be seeing. And so this is the better way to start because it just makes it clear to the buyer that it's just for these properties during this period of time. So you'll put in the period of time. So if it's just for the weekend, so just for the weekend, any of these properties. If you show them other properties that are outside the scope of the showing agreement, you have to add them to the agreement. So this is something that, again, just really solidifies what your responsibilities are and what their responsibilities are, and lets them know that they're not committed to anything outside of just this time period and these properties. So you'd fill in the properties, our obligations, what the consumer's obligations are, and then same as before, compensation, section A, purchase or exchange. So purchase for this or percentage amount. And then I like the second option here, which is a percentage plus the 395. And so again, it just basically says, this is what we charge for our services to help you secure a property. Again, we're going to try to get our fee covered by the other party in the transaction, so it doesn't come out of your pocket directly. But if it does, then it's going to be a closing cost. Make sure they understand it's not an invoice they have to pay outside of closing. They don't need to give you a credit card or anything like that. Section number 6 is about a retainer. I advise not charging a retainer or collecting a retainer. There is a part of me that thinks that we should lead with value and that we should put our money where our mouths are and, make sure that we are of service to clients to have them work with us. Things can get a little messy if you start to charge a retainer because, then they have to worry about who's holding it. We don't hold escrow. And so we would just like to avoid the whole situation altogether. And so I highly recommend just putting $0 here. And then additional terms, if there's any other unique circumstances that you need to address, you would put them here as well. If you were visiting multiple communities for new construction, maybe you'd put that in additional terms here. And so you may have specific addresses that you'll put here for properties that you're showing. But then if you're visiting like a new home community that maybe has multiple addresses or properties that don't yet have addresses, I would put that information here in section 7. So this agreement will also include any new construction properties at this builder in this community or that builder in that community for this time. Again, remember that this has an expiration date on it. And so you can just have it be for the time that you're showing the properties, or you could have it be for a longer time if you're going to be working with them for multiple weeks. Maybe they're looking at homes this weekend, but they're not going to make a decision for a little while. You can extend this range here. Always want to fill out the dispute resolution. We always want to go to arbitration as opposed to going to court, and then have all parties sign. And so again, pretty straightforward. So you would execute this showing agreement, either for every day that you're showing them something, or every weekend, every time period that you're showing, and then you would just have them fill a new agreement out as properties get added. And so if you're filling this out more than one time with somebody, that means that they're used to the paperwork. And what you could do at that point is try to transition them to an actually exclusive buyer agreement. So let's get into the EBBA, or Exclusive Buyer Brokerage Agreement. So this one, again, this is more of what would be considered the buyer version of a listing agreement. This says that no matter what they buy, whether they look at it with you or without you, whether you show them the property or not, if they buy anything at all during this time period, you are protected, you are their agent. And so again, consumer name, the brokerage name is Iron Valley, Central Florida. The term of this agreement, you can make this a 3-month term, 6-month term. Again, if they go into an agreement, let's say this agreement expires at the end of May, they go under contract on something in the middle of May, this agreement automatically extends past the termination date if there's a transaction that hasn't yet closed. And so you're protected, just like a listing agreement. Your listing may be expiring at the end of the month, but if you go under contract, that listing gets automatically extended while that transaction is happening. If that transaction were to terminate after the expiration date, then you lose everything. Property type, This is not super important here. This is just to kind of get everyone on the same page, like, okay, we're looking at townhomes in the downtown Orlando area. That doesn't mean that if they buy a single family home in a suburb that you're not protected. This just says that we're agreeing that this is the scope of properties that we're looking at. So again, buyer obligations, broker obligations, consumer obligations, the retainer section is here as well. Again, recommended is 0. Compensation, choose option A, the second one, which is you put your percentage in and plus the 395 transaction fee. Now, the difference here, so everything so far has been the same as a showing agreement. The difference here, obviously, is that this is for any property, and then we have a protection period. And so if after the termination date, the consumer contracts to acquire a property that was called to their attention by you, doesn't mean you have to show that you showed it to them, but if it was called to their attention by you and they go under contract on that property during the protection period, which is 30 days, you can make it 60, 90, whatever you want, then you're due the fee. So this protects both, well, this protects you as the buyer agent from being um, kind of screwed out of a commission because someone's waiting for their termination date, and then the day after the termination date they're going to go look at that home thinking they're going to save the money not having to pay you. And so basically you've done the work, but they're going to get all the glory for that. So the protection period is a very essential thing to add. 30 to 60 days is great. And then the next section is conditional termination. And so this is something that's very important for you to go over with your buyers. This exclusive buyer agreement can be canceled at any time for any reason. All they have to do is deliver you written notice that they no longer want to work with you. Text messages are technically written notice, but I would prefer that you get the buyer to send you an email, a breakup email that just says, as of this time, I no longer want to work with you, and they want to conditionally terminate the agreement. Similar to terminating a listing agreement, there is going to be a period of time in which they cannot go under contract on something that you've shown them. So they can't try to just break up with you so that they could go somewhere else and try to avoid the agreement artificially. And so this is where it says here, this line here is they may void the contract, but if they enter into it, acquire any property prior to the early termination date, then, and if it was found to have been under contract, if there's something shady going on, then we'll have to come back and get our commission. As a cancellation fee, again, I would put $0. You only want to work with people that want to work with you. You don't want to ever feel like, you have to entrap somebody. Also, if you play this out and you put $500 here as a cancellation fee, well, how do you collect that? Like once they cancel, what are you going to do to try to collect that 500? You're putting yourself in a situation where it's just, you're just making a bad situation worse. And so this is why, you have to be vetting your customers, making sure that they're, serious and pre-qualified, ready, willing, and able. But again, I like $0 here as a cancellation fee. And then dispute resolution, make sure everyone initials. We do want arbitration. And then the brokerage relationship, this is very important. This is a transaction broker agreement, which means that we can represent, so we as the brokerage can represent the same buyer. We can represent the buyer and seller in the same transaction. And so that is perfectly allowed. There is there's a misconception among the general public that you're operating as a single agent. And so there is a version of this exclusive buyer agreement that is single agent. It's going to look pretty much the same. There's going to be an extra section for single agency. The issue, obviously, if you choose to be a single agent, is that you are not able to show them any properties that are listed by Iron Valley, Central Florida. Now, it may not be a huge deal. However, it limits the ability for you to really show them all of the properties that are available. And so if they insist on a single agency agreement, that's fine. What's important to know is you can always transition from one to the other instantaneously. And so it's kind of like, okay, now we're a single agency, we agree, sign this form, we can always transition back to a transaction broker relationship. And so if you have a buyer that really feels passionately that they only want you representing them and they don't want anyone associated with Iron Valley anywhere in the transaction on the other side, then you're going to have more of like a client attorney relationship, where like Morgan and Morgan can't represent both the plaintiff and the defendant in the same case. And so basically they want you to represent just them. They don't want any other, attorneys or agents from the company representing the other side. And so that is something that different. It varies from state to state, but here in Florida, we are transaction brokers by default. And it's important that you understand that the buyer understands that as well. And then again, any other terms that you want to put in here, section 13, and everyone signs, initials, and gets a copy of it. Any questions about this?
What if it comes down to it when the buyer, the sellers are only going to pay, let's say, 2%, and the buyers cannot, their closing costs, they're tapped out.
Yeah.
Uh, what other things can we do um, to,
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you have negotiated the deal and there's just no money there to pay your commissions, at that point you'd come to us and we would figure out what the difference is, what the gap is. And at that point, we may say, all right, just lower your agreement, modify your agreement so that it matches what the buyer can afford to do. We don't want to be the reason that someone can't afford to buy a house, but also, nobody else negotiates their rates, like the title company doesn't, the inspector doesn't, surely the insurance company doesn't. And so I want it to be a very last resort. And so Vivian and I firmly believe that if it makes business sense, then we should do it, but we don't want to give anything away until we absolutely have to. Does that make sense?
right?
So,
Yeah.
so yeah, if and that happens, there's just not enough, I've had that happen on listing sides or buyer sides where the appraisal came in low and there wasn't any money there. And so I agreed to split, I agreed to lower my commission with the other agent to kind of close the gap. And so we can come up with creative solutions, but up front, when we're presenting this, we don't want to mention that. We don't want them to think that this is a movable target because as soon as you tell someone that something is movable, then they're going to try to move it. And so, as a company, we can dictate what our fees are for our clients. There's nothing wrong with that. We can hold firm. And again, we want to offer some flexibility because I don't want you to miss out on opportunities. And so that's our approach is be firm up front. And then, at the end of the day, if there's nothing else that's possible, then we'll, figure it out.